1867. The war is over. The guns have fallen silent, but freedom remains a distant dream for many. In the shadows of a world trying to rebuild, one woman's story emerges, a story so fierce, so unrelenting, that it would shake the very foundations of those who dared to oppress her. She was an enslaved woman, yet the chains that bound her body could never contain her spirit. She became a symbol of courage, a living testament to the power of the human will. And what you are about to hear will not just tell you history, it will show you how one soul can become unforgettable. Imagine walking each day under the weight of a life that is not your own, where every step you take is monitored, every word you speak weighed for defiance, every glance could invite punishment. Yet in the midst of this oppression, there was a woman whose strength did not falter. While others bent and broke under cruelty, she stood tall. She did not just survive, she resisted. Every act of defiance, no matter how small, became a spark that challenged an entire system built on fear and submission. In this video, you will learn about the extraordinary courage of a woman who faced unimaginable danger and lived to tell the story. You will see how the people around her, those who wielded power, those who thought themselves untouchable, found themselves powerless against her resilience. You will witness the kind of bravery that history rarely records, the kind that lives in whispers and legends, inspiring generations long after the moment has passed. Her story is not just about surviving the horrors of slavery, it is about refusing to be broken, even when the world demands it. It is about standing so firmly in your truth, that even those who believe they can control you hesitate. They tried to silence her, they tried to bend her will, they thought they could erase her, but she would not allow it. She became unforgettable, not because of who she was forced to be, but because of the courage she refused to surrender. As you listen, notice the details that most histories leave out, the quiet moments of defiance, the whispered fears of those who underestimated her, the way one woman's strength could alter the course of a room filled with cruelty. This is not just a tale of survival. It is a testament to the human spirit, a reminder that courage can exist even in the darkest corners. And it is a story that demands your attention, because it challenges you to ask yourself, what would I do if my life depended on standing for what I know is right? Stay with us as we uncover the story of a woman who became more than a name in history, who became a legend in her own time. By the end of this video, you will not only understand why she remains unforgettable, but you will also feel the pulse of her courage, the fire that refused to be extinguished, and the lessons her life still holds for every one of us today. Before we talk about the extraordinary courage of this woman, we need to understand the world she was born into. The year was 1867. And slavery, though officially abolished in law, still left deep scars on the lives of those who had endured it. Life for an enslaved person was not measured in years or achievements, but in the relentless grind of survival. From dawn to dusk, her days were filled with backbreaking labor, each task designed to break the body and test the spirit. Fields stretched endlessly, the sun beating down on her shoulders, while overseers watched for any sign of hesitation, ready to punish any perceived disobedience without mercy. Before we talk about her resistance, we must acknowledge the weight she carried every single day. There was no pause, no respite. Every movement was dictated, every minute accounted for. Food was scarce, and often meager, never enough to restore the energy spent on endless labor. The tools of punishment, whips, chains, and harsh words, were ever-present reminders that freedom was a concept they were denied. Even rest was fleeting, a short reprieve before the next day demanded the same grueling routine. Sleep offered no true escape from the oppression. Her world was one of constant fear, exhaustion, and the cruel calculations of those who believed they had dominion over her body. Before we talk about her legendary defiance, picture the punishments she endured. Any mistake, any hesitation, could bring lashes across her back, confinement, or the watchful eyes of men eager to assert power. The smallest act of self-assertion could provoke rage. Pain was not occasional, it was a daily companion, a tool used to remind her that she was considered property, nothing more than labor to be extracted. Yet in the midst of this relentless cruelty, she found ways to endure. She carried herself with a dignity that was impossible to erase. Her eyes, her posture, her very presence spoke of an inner strength that defied the chains around her wrists and the threats that surrounded her. Before we talk about the moments that made her unforgettable, consider her daily reality not as isolated hardship, but as a constant battle for survival. Long hours in the fields, exhaustion pressing down on her body, and the ever-present threat of punishment were the rules of life. Yet even here, in the harshest of circumstances, she distinguished herself. She moved with a quiet resilience, refusing to let the cruelty define her spirit. While others might have succumbed to despair, she carried an unspoken defiance that could not be measured by the lash or the whip. Her strength was not loud or boastful. It was steady, unwavering, and deeply human. Before we talk about the pivotal events of her life, it is important to remember that her daily struggles were not just physical, they were emotional and psychological. She had to navigate fear, humiliation, and constant surveillance, all while finding the courage to hold on to a sense of self-worth. Each day she endured, she became a symbol, even unknowingly, of resistance. In a world designed to crush her, her spirit remained unbroken. It is this remarkable strength, this persistence against unimaginable odds, that set her apart and laid the foundation for the incredible story that history would never forget. Before we talk about the moments that truly defined her courage, we need to understand how she carried herself in the presence of those who sought to dominate her. While many bowed their heads, whispered compliance, or endured in silence, she refused to let fear dictate her actions. The overseers, men accustomed to unquestioned control, soon realized that she was unlike anyone they had encountered. Her refusal to submit, even in small ways, sent ripples through the plantation, challenging the very rules designed to keep her in line. Before we talk about the more dramatic events, consider the small acts of defiance that set her apart. A glance that met authority without fear, a word spoken quietly but firmly, asserting her presence, a task completed on her own terms, with dignity and care, rather than the rushed compliance demanded by her overseers. These moments, seemingly minor to outsiders, were revolutionary in a world built on obedience. Each act, each refusal to bow, became a quiet protest against a system determined to erase her humanity. Before we talk about the larger confrontations, imagine the courage it took to persist daily in this way. Even under constant threat of punishment, she maintained her posture, her gaze, her sense of self. When others were crushed by fear or intimidation, she stood firm, showing an inner strength that could not be chained. Her resilience was not a single heroic moment. It was woven into the fabric of her everyday life. It was present in how she walked, in how she spoke, and in the calm defiance she displayed when confronted with cruelty. Before we talk about the attention her acts drew, remember that resistance is rarely loud. Sometimes it is in the choices we make when no one is watching, in the refusal to accept what is demanded without question. She carried this quiet rebellion with her everywhere she went. When ordered to perform humiliating tasks, she completed them with a dignity that refused to acknowledge the power of her oppressors. When others flinched or cowered, she met each command with steady composure, forcing those who sought to control her to recognize her unwavering resolve. Before we talk about the turning points that would make her story legendary, consider the psychological impact of her defiance. Every act, no matter how small, reminded the overseers that their authority was not absolute. It shook the confidence of those who relied on fear to enforce submission. And yet she did not act out of malice or pride. She acted from necessity, from the fundamental understanding that her spirit was hers alone. This clarity of purpose, combined with unshakable courage, marked her as someone impossible to intimidate. Before we talk about the moments that would cement her place in history, it is clear that her inner strength was extraordinary. In a world designed to crush individuality, she remained steadfast. Her resilience was a shield, her defiance, a weapon that could not be measured in brute force. It was in the sum of countless small acts, repeated day after day, that she became more than a person. She became a symbol of courage, a force that no overseer could contain or command. And in this quiet, persistent rebellion, the foundation was laid for the unforgettable legacy she would leave behind. Before we talk about the moment that would forever mark her story, we need to understand the events that led to it. Her courage, her constant defiance, and her refusal to be controlled had angered those in power. They saw her as a threat, not just to their authority, but to the fragile order they tried to maintain. Rumors of her daring acts and unwavering spirit spread quickly, and the overseers grew desperate to assert control. They decided that a public display of punishment was necessary, a lesson meant to silence her and intimidate anyone who might follow her example. Before we talk about the execution itself, consider the tension that filled the air that day. The overseers were certain of their plan, confident in the tools and authority at their disposal. They believed that fear alone would accomplish what their whips could not. But as they approached her, something unexpected happened. The air seemed to shift, the usual certainty, the arrogance that came with unchecked power, faltered. There was hesitation in their movements, a tremor in their voices. The very presence of this woman, so calm, so composed, seemed to disarm them in a way no one had anticipated. Before we talk about the first attempt, imagine the scene from their perspective. Here was a woman they believed they could break, yet every glance, every small movement conveyed a strength they could not confront. They were faced with the impossible, a person who refused to yield, whose spirit remained untouchable despite the threat of death. Shock passed through them, mingled with fear, as they realized that she was not like any other enslaved person they had known. There was an aura about her, something almost unexplainable, that made them question their own authority. Before we talk about the attempt itself, it is important to understand that the overseer's hesitation was not just fear of failure, it was fear of the unknown. Their experience had taught them control, compliance and obedience, but she offered none of these. She stood with quiet defiance, her eyes unflinching, her posture unbowed. Every instinct told them to act, but every instinct also warned them that this act might not go as planned. There was a tension between duty and dread, between the order they were meant to enforce, and the mysterious force she seemed to embody. Before we talk about what followed, consider the moment of decision. They attempted to carry out the execution, but something held them back. It was as if her resilience, her refusal to be broken, had created a barrier that even the strongest hands could not cross. They could prepare, they could command, they could threaten, but they could not force her spirit to yield. In the end, their hesitation grew, their confidence eroded, and they were unable to complete what they had intended. Before we talk about the aftermath, recognize the power of this moment. The first execution attempt was not just a failure, it was a revelation. It showed that strength of spirit could stand against cruelty, that courage could challenge authority, and that a single person, unbowed, could inspire fear in those who believed themselves untouchable. Even in the face of imminent death, she had become untouchable in a way that went far beyond the physical, leaving a mark on everyone who witnessed it, and setting the stage for the extraordinary events that would follow. Before we talk about what happened after the first attempt, it's important to grasp the sheer impossibility of her survival. The execution was meant to be final, meant to erase her defiance once and for all. But against all odds, she lived. How she survived remains a mixture of astonishment, fear and awe. The act that was intended to break her body instead became a testament to the strength of her spirit. Those who had gathered to witness the punishment could scarcely believe their eyes. A woman, so determined to be crushed, had defied death itself. Before we talk about the toll it took, consider what she endured. The physical pain was unimaginable. Her body bore the marks of violence, bruised and battered from the attempt that should have ended her life. Every movement became a struggle, every breath a reminder of how close she had come to being extinguished. Yet even in this agony, she did not surrender. Her resilience was raw and unfiltered, a combination of sheer willpower and an inner fire that refused to be dimmed. Pain was no longer a tool used against her, it became proof of her survival, proof that the human spirit can endure beyond expectation. Before we talk about the mental strain, imagine what she must have faced in her mind. Fear, shock, and confusion collided with relief and determination. She had looked death in the face and emerged still standing, yet the weight of that moment lingered. Each thought, each heartbeat, carried the memory of what she had faced. But rather than breaking her, the experience strengthened her resolve. She learned the limits of human cruelty, and more importantly, she learned that her courage could surpass even the most terrifying threats. Her mind, like her body, became a battlefield, where she claimed victory not by fleeing, but by standing firm. Before we talk about the impact on others, remember that survival alone would have been remarkable, but her emergence from this ordeal also carried symbolic power. Among the enslaved, whispers began to circulate. Stories of her defiance and survival spread like wildfire, growing with each retelling. She became more than a person, she became a symbol, a figure of inspiration. To those who had felt powerless, she represented hope. To those who had enforced cruelty, she became an enigma, a source of fear and uncertainty. Her survival challenged everything they thought they knew about control and obedience. Before we talk about what followed, consider how this act of living transformed her legend. She was no longer just a brave woman, she had become untouchable in the minds of everyone around her. The overseers who had tried to end her life were forced to reckon with her indomitable spirit. Fellow slaves saw in her a model of resistance, proof that even in the darkest circumstances, courage could shine through. Her survival was a story that demanded to be remembered, retold, and revered. It was a reminder that strength is not measured solely by physical ability, but by the resilience of the heart and mind. Before we talk about the next chapter in her story, it is clear that this miraculous survival was a turning point. It solidified her place in history, not as a victim, but as a force. Her legend grew with every whispered retelling, with every glance of awe or fear from those who witnessed her endurance. In surviving what should have destroyed her, she had become more than a person. She had become an idea, an embodiment of courage that neither time nor cruelty could erase. Before we talk about the second attempt, we must understand why the authorities felt compelled to try again. Her survival of the first execution was more than a failure in their eyes. It was a challenge, a direct affront to their authority. To the overseers and those in power, allowing her to live after defiance was unacceptable. It threatened the control they had maintained for years, and it risked inspiring others to resist. They believed that a second, more decisive act would finally break her, put an end to the whispers of her courage, and restore the order they demanded. Before we talk about the attempt itself, consider the atmosphere that surrounded it. The tension was palpable. Every command barked, every movement of the executioners was met with uncertainty and dread. The memory of the first failure hung heavily over the proceedings. Even those who had been certain of their power now hesitated, their confidence shaken. The air was thick with fear, not just for her, but for themselves. How could they enforce their authority on someone who had already defied death once? The anxiety among the overseers and officials created a strange energy, equal parts anticipation and dread, as if the very world was holding its breath. Before we talk about her actions in this moment, imagine the courage it took to face what most would see as inevitable death. She knew they would not relent, and yet she stood with composure, unflinching. Every eye upon her, every whisper of the crowd, every step of the executioners, tested her resolve. She did not cower, she did not plead, she faced the moment with a calm that unnerved even the most hardened men. Her bravery was not loud or boastful, it was quiet, steady and resolute. It was the courage of someone who understood that fear could exist without surrendering to it. Before we talk about the reactions of those around her, note how her presence alone seemed to shape the moment. The overseers, who believed themselves masters of life and death, now wrestled with their own apprehension. Their hands trembled, their voices faltered, and their usual authority seemed brittle. This was a woman who had stared down death once, and had emerged not just alive, but unbroken. To confront her again was to confront a force that could not be easily measured or contained. Their fear was a reflection of her power, a testament to the courage that radiated from her in the face of impossible odds. Before we talk about what followed, consider the paradox of this moment. While the threat of death loomed closer than ever, her strength only grew. In a world designed to crush, she stood resilient. The tension surrounding the second attempt amplified her legend, making it clear to all who witnessed it that courage could exist even in the most desperate circumstances. She became a living symbol that fear does not have to dictate action, that even against certain death, one can remain unbroken, unshaken, and undeniably human. Before we talk about the next stage of her story, it is evident that the second attempt did more than challenge her body. It revealed the extraordinary depth of her spirit. The courage she displayed in the face of overwhelming threat became the defining trait of her legacy. Every glance, every movement, every breath she took in that moment reinforced the truth. True strength is measured not by the absence of danger, but by the refusal to let fear control you. And in that refusal, she became something that could not be ignored, something that would haunt the minds of both the oppressed and the oppressors alike. Before we talk about the aftermath of the second attempt, we need to understand the extraordinary effect her survival had on those around her. The overseers, men who had been trained to control and dominate without question, suddenly found themselves hesitant. After witnessing her resilience, after seeing a woman face death twice, and emerge unbroken, no one could bring themselves to lay a hand on her again. Their confidence, once absolute, faltered in the presence of a spirit that refused to yield. She had become untouchable, not through force, but through sheer courage and unshakable resolve. Before we talk about the stories that followed, imagine the shock that rippled through the plantation. The same men who had enforced cruelty without hesitation now whispered among themselves, uncertain and uneasy. They spoke of the impossible strength she displayed, of how nothing they did could bend her. Rumors began to spread, not just among the slaves, but even among those in power. Some said she possessed an unearthly protection. Others believed that fate itself had chosen her. The ordinary rules of authority and fear no longer applied. She had turned their weapons, their threats, and their certainty into something meaningless. Before we talk about the legends that grew, consider how these stories shaped her reputation. Each whispered account, each retelling of her survival, added layers to her mystique. Fellow slaves spoke of her with reverence, seeing in her a symbol of hope and defiance. Even the overseers, who once believed themselves untouchable, began to speak cautiously, aware that her presence alone was a challenge they could not confront. Her strength became a legend, a living example of courage that transcended the boundaries of fear and control. Before we talk about the broader impact, think about the shift in perception that took place. She was no longer just a person. She had become a force that reshaped the dynamics of the plantation. The oppressors, who had once believed they held absolute power, now viewed her with respect, fear and a strange kind of awe. Her defiance had forced them to acknowledge that power is not only measured in cruelty, but in the strength of spirit. Her survival had altered the way she was seen. She had moved from the position of the powerless to someone whose courage demanded recognition, even from those who sought to dominate. Before we talk about what this meant for her community, understand that her resilience had consequences far beyond her own survival. It inspired those around her, showing that even in the darkest circumstances, one person could defy expectation and alter reality. The stories, exaggerated or not, circulated rapidly, reinforcing her status as someone extraordinary. Her endurance became a lesson in the limits of human control, a reminder that strength and courage can unsettle even the most confident oppressors. Before we talk about the next chapter of her story, it is clear that her survival, and the refusal of the overseers to touch her, created a turning point. She had transformed from a figure of suffering into a symbol of invincibility. The legends, the whispers, the awe, all these shaped a perception that would never fade. She was no longer just an individual facing cruelty. She was a testament to the unbreakable human spirit, a living legend whose presence demanded respect, fear and ultimately admiration from all who encountered her. Before we talk about her legacy, we need to see how her courage transformed her into something far greater than a single person. Surviving what should have been certain death not once but twice, she became a symbol of hope for those around her. Her story spread quickly, carried by whispers, glances and hushed conversations among the enslaved. Every mention of her name reminded people that resistance was possible, that strength could exist even in the harshest conditions. She was no longer simply a woman facing oppression. She was a beacon, a living example of what it meant to defy cruelty with unshakable resolve. Before we talk about how she inspired others, imagine the effect her story had on those who had long endured suffering in silence. Her courage gave them a vision of possibility. It showed that fear could be met with defiance, that survival did not require submission. Small acts of resistance, refusing to follow unjust orders, helping one another, or asserting dignity in daily life, suddenly seemed achievable. She became a model of what it meant to stand tall in a world determined to bend you, and her example ignited courage in hearts that had almost forgotten it. Before we talk about the broader impact, consider how her story transcended her immediate surroundings. Rumors of her resilience reached beyond her plantation, carried to neighboring communities, and even to those in power. Enslaved people shared her story with reverence, teaching younger generations about bravery, perseverance, and the importance of holding on to one's humanity. Each retelling reinforced the idea that oppression could be challenged, that even in circumstances designed to crush the human spirit, one person could inspire others to act, to resist, and to hope. Before we talk about the personal influence she had, think about the psychological shift she created. Oppressors began to notice the change in those around her. Subtle acts of defiance became more frequent, fueled by the belief that courage was contagious. Her presence and her survival showed that fear could be overcome, that authority was not absolute, and that even the harshest systems could be challenged by unyielding spirit.
Her actions were not merely a story of survival. They were a blueprint for resistance, a demonstration of the power of inner strength in the face of overwhelming odds. Before we talk about the lasting mark she left, remember that symbols endure long after the moment has passed. Her courage became part of the collective memory of her community, an anchor for hope in times of despair. She reminded everyone who heard her story that oppression was not invincible, and that even the smallest acts of defiance mattered. Children grew up hearing of her bravery, and adults found in her example the strength to endure another day. She had become more than an individual. She had become a symbol, a living lesson in courage, resilience, and the enduring power of hope. Before we talk about what her legacy teaches us today, it is clear that her story left a permanent imprint. She changed how her community saw themselves, how they imagined resistance, and how they understood their own strength. In surviving the impossible and standing unbroken, she became an emblem of human courage, a source of hope that refused to fade, and a reminder that one person's spirit can inspire generations to rise, endure, and fight for dignity against all odds. Her story shows us the extraordinary power of one person's bravery. One woman facing impossible odds, challenged an entire system built on fear, control, and cruelty. Her courage did more than save her life. It shook those in power, inspired her community, and created a legend that would live far beyond her time. She reminds us that true strength is not measured by force, but by the refusal to be broken, and that even in the darkest moments, one individual can light the way for others. Her defiance is not just a story from the past, it is a lesson for all who fight for freedom, justice, and dignity. It teaches us that standing up for what is right, even when the world tells us we cannot, can ripple through history, inspiring generations to resist oppression and embrace courage. Her legacy is a testament to the unbreakable human spirit, a symbol that fear can be faced, and cruelty can be defied. If her story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of courage, and the importance of standing up for what is right, then make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you help us share more stories that honor bravery, resilience, and the fight for justice. Her legacy deserves to be remembered, and together we can keep her courage alive.